Okay. So, so let's start with during the Cold War, the US versus the Soviet Union. So the world was bipolar, right? So you belong to the American camp or you belong to the Soviet camp. So that was the bipolar world. And then the Soviet Union collapsed, and starting in about 1991, it became, the unipolar world. So it was just the U.S. The U.S. was the king of the world. There was only one military, there was only one currency, the dollar, and there was only one internet, one Google. And if you messed around with the US, it's going to bomb the hell out of you. And, so it was just like one country ruled the world for a while. But that fell apart in about 2008, So the unipolar world, it lasted for about 25 years, and then it started to shake. But then the US still could not understand the rise of China. They were still stuck in the old the mentality that the Chinese were just making shoes and t-shirts.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of 2014, China, they actually surpassed the U.S. in what is known as the PPP GDP, which is the purchasing power parity. So because if you have $1 in the U.S., it's going to buy a lot more in China than in the U.S. So that was the wake up call, and that's when you had the rise of Donald Trump, and he talked about China, 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 for 5 years. But the US was not able to stop the rise of China. So, and so there are some things that a lot of Americans don't understand as to what makes the US so powerful. So the first is the dollar. So since the 1940s, the dollar has been the king of the world. And that gives Americans extraordinary power, right? So the first is the ability to print and borrow like there's no tomorrow, right? So you can run fiscal deficit every year. You can run a trade deficit, right? And you just have to print dollars, right? And all the rest of the world has to work their asses off, right? The Chinese have to work in the factories. They have to assemble the smartphones. They have to do the hard work. The Africans have to work so hard to make the coffee beans. The Indians have to write the programs, and all that the Americans have to do is print, print, print money, right? So the world has been sort of struggling to escape from this the unipolarity. I mean, the American the hegemony, because the U.S. did not use its power in very good ways, right? It went and bombed Iraq with just lies about the WMD. It went and bombed Afghanistan for 20 years. You know, there are people who barely make $1 a day. Like in Afghanistan, and you drop like a $1 million bomb on them. It just makes absolutely no sense. And what the U.S. did in the Middle East, just causing chaos all over the world. I'm sorry, guys.
No, no doubt. Libya, Yemen, Somalia. I mean, you can just list the countries. I mean,
Yeah,
Libya is basically, a disaster since the Benghazi. I mean, just
Yeah,
all
right.
United States backed.
Yeah. So that's all now going to end. Okay. So because that is the multipolar world where there are going to be with choices for everything. So you are not stuck with the U.S. dollar. So you can use yuan, you can use the local currencies, and so BRICS, the five countries, they're now trying to add a lot of new members, and they're going to develop their own currency. So the first one is, I mean, the de-dollarization. So there are like three major parts to the multipolar world. So the first is the currency. So you're not going to have the dollar hegemony, and but every country will have multiple choices to trade in. Right. So because if you would depend on the dollar, then you become basically a puppet of the U.S. Because the U.S. can like threaten you with sanctions, like with Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, and they're all being tortured by the U.S. Because they don't bow. And like look what happened to Russia. So as Russia had 400, $500 billion in the foreign exchange reserves. And when the war started, the U.S. They used it as an excuse, and the U.S. government they basically stole that $400 billion of the Russian money. So the world saw this. They're like, man, this is just way too much. So we need a more democratic system where so countries have to work as friends and as equals, and it's not going to be a boss and you know oh yes sir so uh, uh, so they don't want that bossy relationship. They don't want the dictatorial relationship. So the de-dollarization is number one, and number two is one of the key strengths of the U.S. is to play the divide and rule, right? And they learned that from the European, the colonialists, right? So these British, Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, they went and conquered the whole world. They went and conquered Africa and Asia. They just robbed people, ruthlessly for like 200 years. And the way they did that was, the divide and rule, so make one person fight another, and then at the end they both are weak and you take over them both. So when the World War II, it finished the European the colonialism, it basically started the Americas, the neocolonialism, right? So the U.S. became the friendly face of the modern the colonialism. So they made this African tribe fight that African tribe. Sunnis fight the Shiites. The Russians fight the Chinese. Blah blah blah. So, but now there has been like an awakening. So people are like, so I don't know why it took so long, but suddenly people are like, oh my God, this is why I'm so poor. And this is why I don't have a house, because I am just stupidly fighting with my neighbors. So suddenly Saudi Arabia and Iran, so who would have thought, right? And now Saudi Arabia and Iran are together, but thanks to China. So they went to Beijing. They, signed a peace deal, and Syria and Turkey. They've been fighting each other for the last 15 years, and but today they are in Moscow. we're talking peace. So the peace is going to be a big thing in the multipolar world, and all countries are going to be friends and allies. So but there won't be a boss anymore.